It's above all an age of darkness, an age of ignorance and superstition, an age when people thought the world was flat. Now, all these images about the Middle Ages have one thing in common, and that is that they're all wrong. Now, let's start with the idea that people in the Middle Ages thought the world was flat. Well, going back to Aristotle in the 4th century BC, Aristotle said the world is round. So it was all there to people ought to know that the world was round. I can never pronounce it. I always do it when I practice it, but I can never say it. Eratosthenes, he actually calculated the circumference of the Earth. He said it was 252,000 stadia. Now, if he was using the Greek stadium, that meant he was an error of 16%. But if he was using the Egyptian stadium, he was actually only 1% out. And as he was the chief librarian of the library at the time, he was probably using the Egyptian stadium. So he calculated the circumference of the world. Ptolemy comes along a bit later, and he calculates the circumference of the world with an error of 28%. Or 26%, is it? 28%. I haven't got my glasses on. And he's published, his geography is published in the early 15th century. And so he influenced a lot of the thinking about the Middle Ages. Now, there were two churchmen who did think that the world was flat. This guy at the top there, Lucius Lactantius, he said, "Is there anyone so silly as to believe that there are human beings on the other side of the world with their legs above their heads?" But actually, he wasn't very influential because he was condemned for heresy. Cosmos Indico Plustes, he was totally uninfluential because none of his work was translated into Latin in the Middle Ages. So these two people who did think the world was flat had absolutely no effect on medieval thought at the time. St. Augustine had said that the Bible doesn't say whether the world's round or flat, and if the pagan philosophers say that it's round, well, so be it. Maybe it is round. Some of the most influential geographers of the time, Macrobius and Martianus Capella, they said that the world was round. St. Isidore Seville said the world was round. The Venerable Bede said the world is round like a ball. Roger Bacon, the great friar, the great scientist, he said the curvature of the earth explains why we can see things from higher elevations, can see further from higher elevations. Nicholas Oresme said the earth is round like a ball, and he even discussed the rotation of the earth's sphere. Chaucer himself says, this wide world that men say is round would I give if I was lord of it. People knew the world was round. They even had images of the round world. They knew the world was a globe, the orb and scepter. The orb is a round globe with Christ's cross sitting on the top of it, signifying Christ's dominion of the globe of the world. And it's pictured on medals. It's you have it in every the ruler has it is shown holding the earth in his hand, the round earth. And it's even pictured on coins, so it was in common usage. And it's even on the maps. This isn't Christ saying this is the second ball of the over. It's actually a picture of Christ holding up the world in his hand. So the question is, of course, if all educated opinion in the Middle Ages was that the world was round, was a sphere, why do we think that they thought that it was flat? Well, I'm afraid the fault lies with an American journalist by the name of Washington Irving. Now, Washington Irving wrote the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. as well as a biography of Muhammad. And he, in 1828, he wrote a biography of Christopher Columbus. And in this biography of Christopher Columbus, he describes this great confrontation that Christopher Columbus had between the church fathers and himself at Salamanca, where the church fathers accused him of heresy for saying that the world was round when the church taught that the earth was flat. Well, as we can see, the church never taught that the world was flat, apart from two characters who were totally uninfluential. And actually, Washington Irving just made this whole thing up. He made up this scene. But it was picked up by the Darwinists, and then it became public currency. When they said, oh, if you don't believe in evolution, then you're like the people in the Middle Ages who thought the world was flat. Now, there was a confrontation at Salamanca, but it was between the scientific committee set up by Ferdinand and Isabella to make sure that their investment, if they were going to invest in Columbus's voyage around the world, they weren't throwing their money away. So they had the best brains that they had. Some of them were churchmen, some of them were secular, to actually discuss with Columbus the feasibility of the voyage. And now the idea of whether the world was a globe or not didn't come into it. It was absolutely, everybody knew that the world was a globe. The whole point of the discussion was how far it was from Europe to Japan. And they were sitting down. Ptolemy said, if you went back with Ptolemy's version, he said there was 50% land and 50% sea. And so Europe to Japan by Eratosthenes, they would be 20,000 kilometers. Actually, it's only 14,000 on Ptolemy's estimate of the circumference of the Earth. And the scientific committee meeting Columbus went along with the Ptolemy's estimate. So they said 14,000 kilometers. But even for them, 14,000 kilometers was too far to travel in those days. You just couldn't equip a ship with enough provisions to last for 14,000 kilometers. So Columbus had so it was going to be a waste of money if they went ahead with the thing. So Columbus had to persuade them that it was much smaller than it really was. Now he did this by a series of arguments. First of all, he said, forget Ptolemy, we've got a new estimate of the circumference of the Earth by the Bishop of Noyon, and he says it's 62% land and 37% sea. So that actually only makes the journey from Europe to Japan 10,000 kilometers. And what's more, he says, Marco Polo showed that China extends much further east than we thought, so we could knock off another 28 degrees. We've got 70% land and 30% sea, which gives us a grand total of 8,640 kilometers from Europe to Japan. And then he says, Japan is actually much further east than we think it is of China. So we could actually knock off another 30 degrees, 79% land and only 21% sea. It gives us 6,048 kilometers. And he says, I'm going to be leaving from the Canary Islands, so we can knock off another 9 degrees. Pierre Daly actually got it wrong, so we knock off another 8 degrees. So that gives us 83% land, 60% sea, and he also fiddled with the length of the nautical mile. So we got a grand total of 4,450 kilometers. In actual fact, it's actually 22,000. So actually, Columbus was actually claiming that the world was 20% of its actual size. So when you look at that picture again, you think, well, the ignorant churchmen were actually being the more scientific, and Columbus was actually a bit of a con man. He was trying to brag his way through to get money out of Ferdinand and Isabella.